And this is the Upstairs to the Right music channel. I want to thank you guys so much, always, for showing up. So many people here in the live stream already. Thank you guys for taking the time to tune in on this Sunday at Mike's. Yes, we've made it through another week, and I want to say, as I always start out by saying that I want to thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time here with me, whether this finds you in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening, like it is here in Amsterdam. Thank you so much for your time. It's always appreciated. And yeah, let's get rolling with this show tonight. Let me first, before I get started, check and see. Yeah, everything is copacetic. My screen is I could have cleaned my lens a little better. That's all right. A little hazy is all right. Mr. Watson, Mr. Big, Mr. Bogfoot, how are you guys doing this evening? Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to be here, guys. So I got as you know, I don't or haven't really bought anything from Temu in a while. It's just I gave it a shot and I bought some good tools from it actually. But I prefer AliExpress, and if I'm going to go that direction, I generally I've been using them since Singapore, so I generally had no problems with them. But as you know, I guess because of the tariffs, I'm sorry, China is having an issue with exporting their Temu crap. Not all of it's crap, but their Temu stuff to the United States. So they're pushing hard here in the EU. And I still have the app. And I got a notification on the app the other day. They said, hey, we noticed you haven't ordered something for us for a while, so we're going to give you 50 euros coupon. So you can apply it to anything as long as it's above a certain amount, and we'll give you 50 euros off. Now, I I have been eyeing. I think one of the reasons I got a notification is I've been looking for hard cases. As you know, with my import export business, I get guitars in, and believe it or not, when you sell the guitar with a hard case, it generally brings a little bit more of a premium to it. So I generally like to try to get hard cases when I can with the stuff that I buy. If I buy it and it doesn't have a hard case, then generally what I'll do is I'll try to look around and see if I can find one on the cheap. Generally secondhand. Now I was buying secondhand hard cases here locally, and quite frankly, they were just garbage. They were not well treated. I'm too spoiled. I really find that Japanese secondhand is second to none in all the places in the world that I've lived. I've lived in 5 countries, and I can say that Japanese secondhand is second to none. And so I don't buy local anymore. So I was looking around because I wanted to buy a couple of hard cases, one for Les Paul, one for a Strat, and it came across Temu was one of the offers I got. I bookmarked it, and it was pretty cheap. The flight case for the Les Paul was around 107 euros, and the hard case, very nice hard case for the Strat, was around 73. So you put those two together, you apply 50 euro deposit, a coupon to it. And I said, you know what? For that kind of makes sense. So I ordered those two cases. So knock on wood, I have Temu hard cases coming. I hope that they're of decent quality. They seem to be. They seem to be. And so they couldn't be any different than, because I've seen the same resellers on AliExpress. So I think they're pretty good. But in any case, the second thing that I got out of that deal is I got a very inexpensive, well, not inexpensive, but pretty inexpensive Telecaster neck pickup, Alnico 3. Now, I want to talk about that a little bit, start off tonight. So, but let me catch up here in the live chat as it goes. How's it going, Sunday Guitar Crew? Mike, how you doing? It's going well. Hello from Frog, says Min I Al. Interesting name. Welcome to you. Run Riot, hey, how you doing? Les Paul should have a good hard showcase, in my opinion. I agree, Mike. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well, Benny says. Yes, we're doing well. So glad to have you here, Benny. Welcome. Yeah, I believe, as you know, I'm a strong proponent of having hard cases. Ben, welcome. How you doing? Welcome. For my own personal instruments, as a matter of fact, I have a hard case. Uh, it's a vintage one, actually. I think it's an 80s Japanese hard case that's on its way. If this hard case I got from Temu ends up being pretty good, I might keep the vintage case for myself and use the new hard case for the Stratocaster that I have coming in. But we'll see. But I saw an opportunity to also there they had, for that price, I think it all in total came in for two hard cases and a bass soft bag because I don't have I gave away to a friend my one and only bass carrying bag. I never keep a hard a case for bass guitars. I never have, but I always have a soft case. But I gave mine away, so I got that. So basically, three cases and the Telecaster Alnico 3 neck pickup, all four with a coupon. It came out to 152 euros. That's not bad actually. If any of that stuff ends up being decent, that's actually kind of a deal because I always roll the cost of the cases into when I sell the instruments anyway. So I recoup that. And if I can recoup it as low, if I can keep the price down, recouping makes it a lot easier. So that's a bonus. But I was eyeing Q pickups. As you know, I got a new Telecaster in my Aria Pro 2 Telecaster. It's still down at Fern's. He still has. I told him to take his time, and that's okay. But I suspect that within a few days he'll probably be calling me. But I ran it through its paces, and I love the bridge pickup, which I reckon to be a Alnico 5 pickup. But as the case always stands with most Telecasters, I always find Alnico 2 or Alnico 5 pickups to be a little bit weak for a neck pickup. You need a lot of clarity that unfortunately that in a neck position on Telecaster, those magnets, I don't feel give you. So I ended up buying that inexpensive, it was about, I don't know what it was with the coupon. By the time the coupon was basically free. Alnico 3 pickup from Temu. Now I have, no, those are AliExpress. I am curious about that as well. As you know, I can solder in and solder out myself. So I'll take the neck pick out and I'll try this out. I looked at Q pickups, as I said, because I buy pickups from them. The pickups I have in my Partscaster Strat are Q pickups. Alnico 3 pickups, as a matter of fact. I like Alnico 3 pickups. I like the clarity. But I think that in this price range, Q pickups is about $56. This one was about $26, so about a 30 euro difference between the two of them. I just, I was looking at the cloth wiring on both of them, actually. These are actually really, the Temu one is actually, for the specs on paper, it sounds pretty good. So I'll let you know about that, guys. I've never bought, pickups from, even AliExpress. I only buy these kind of, well, this is not one, but pre-wired stuff like this, and that come with ceramic pickups generally. This would be actually the first time I bought anything that had a Alnico pickup in it from this kind of agency. But honestly speaking, at a certain price point, you really can't go wrong too much. But we'll see. Let me catch up here in the chat. Android Games, yo, what was your April month's revenue? For this channel? Actually, it was in the minus. You know, YouTube called me up and said I owe them $20. They said I gotta start chipping on their electricity. They're gonna cut me out. We need Battlefront 3, says man. I agree with you. I was just playing Battlefront 2 actually just yesterday, to tell you the truth. Yes, I do sometimes play video games on my day off. Again, like I said, I want to get as far away from guitars as I can, and a galaxy far, far away is pretty far. So I was playing Battle. I agree, Battlefront 3 would be great. I have to agree with that. I really was just playing Battlefront 2 yesterday. So I'm not sure. You know, budget parts can actually deliver. And what specs matter most in pickups? It's usually just the quality of the wiring at the end of the day. And you know, it also puts you in a kind of thinking where I'm good in regards to where to spend and where to save. You know, I don't, you know, I'm not 100% sure that an Alnico 3 pickup in the neck position there is going to work. I would rather save $30 to find out. If that one sounds good, I'll keep it for a while. Then maybe I'll graduate up to the Q pickups. But just, you know, kind of want to start out tonight's conversation by talking about that, saving money, all of that, you know, the cases along with the pickup and making those decisions are all about saving money. It's all about where to spend and where to save, especially these days with, you know, a hobby in some guys' cases, a profession in others, job like, you know, you know, hobby like this, guitars, for most part, for most of us. And honestly speaking, you know, you should try to these days stay in the game. Don't feel like you can't afford to do things. Just think about the best ways that you can do them affordably. You know, your name Curtis Knight, and you're asking me what's good. Curtis Knight, really? Oh boy. Let's see. Anyway, that was just where I wanted to open up tonight. I thought it was very interesting that Q pickups actually had Alnico 3 uh, pickups. They had Alnico 2 as well. But I really think that Alnico 3 pickups, especially in the neck position, is really going to give you a kind of clarity that you need. Telecasters in the neck position generally are muddy. And I don't care how much you spend on the Telecaster. That's been my experience. And of course, you can get that pickup, especially if it's out nickel 5 or out nickel 2. You can get that pickup as close to the strings as possible, you know, in order to try to help alleviate. There's always a sweet spot there, but it's never quite sweet enough. Even in my Telecaster, my old one, my Fender, I did swap and put in a Seymour Duncan neck pickup. So, you know, that I liked. And again, it was Alnico 3. So this is not just supposition. This is really based upon my experience over quite a few years now. And I think that it's something worth looking at. If you're getting some muddiness, lack of clarity, and you've done everything in terms of adjustment you can on your Telecaster and the neck pickup, it's probably time to think about getting it. One of those occasions where I would say that modding is a good idea and look into getting an affordable replacement. And Alnico 3 is not a bad place to start. You know, I wouldn't put an Alnico 3 pickup in a Telecaster in the bridge position, but in the neck, I think it's a good match to my experience. Um, and so there is that. Let me find my notes here, guys. Yeah, here we go. All right, I found them. What's this? Let's catch up in the. I'm way better at guitar than you. Well, Mr. Knight, I guess we'll just have to take your word for that. Patrick, I ordered some cases from Tomond. They're very decent and not that expensive. That's very interesting that you should say that, Patrick, that when I was looking for the hard case for the Strat, the Temu case And the tome on case, they're tweed cases, so brown cases with brown faux leather, or maybe real leather binding on them. Uh, they, to my eye, the interior and exterior, they look like the same case, actually. The only difference was the Tome On had a little Tome On badge on it. The one that I ordered did not. So that's the other thing that I'm interested in seeing, if these Temu cases are basically non-branded, Tome On cases. Because if that's the case, see how I did that? If that's the case, then that's a good savings for me. Free shipping, and I think there was about a $20 difference, a €20 difference there. So we'll see. We'll see. Good that you brought that up. That's something else I'm interested in seeing. Michael Watson, I love the neck pickup on a Strat. Pretty much the only one I use. Yeah, when I had a single Strat, I rode the neck position in that thing all the time, and it was a beautiful thing. So I agree with that. And a lot of guys do that. Or you'll find the opposite. You'll find guys that just ride the bridge pickup all the time on a Strat. Although everybody tell you the 4 position is the best, but I've never heard anybody that just, hung out there. I got a local shop that will give me a deal on any hard cases. Yeah, if you have, there's a shop in Tokyo that I deal with. As a matter of fact, I've got their very well used cloth here. It's called, I don't know if you can see that, Tishigaki. And I've been dealing with this was the shop in Tokyo that I was dealing with for years. And they sometimes have sales or giveaways on cases. They're like, we're going to give some of these cases away, and if you can carry it away, you can take it. And there's some nice cases. I just was not in a position to be able to do anything. Ha ha ha, Mr. Knight. Actually, that was funny though. That's a good one. Patrick, I don't think Tomon makes them by itself. No, they don't. They reach out to an OEM. So I'm interested to see. So we will see. I suspect that in this case, see, I did it again, for my casket case. I suspect they're the same. I think they're the same. Let me do something here. Like I said, I got the big screen here, so I like to use it every now and then. So we'll adjust that and make this the new backdrop. And here we have a photo of the Strings and Things shop in Memphis with all the people who work there at that shop at the time. We're going to talk about this shop tonight. Speaking of making mods, making mods on my Telecaster, as you know, it's all original, and I am loath to change anything on it. It's from 1996. That means from 1996 till now, nobody made a single change, nor put a single scratch or a real significant ding in it. So I don't want to be that guy to come along and do that. However, I've came to, as you guys know, I was hemming and hawing over changing the pickups in that guitar. Decided that the bridge pickup is fine, so I'm going to let that ride. I will halfway, do a mod on that by changing the neck pickup. I decided. So there's that. Mike says 100 USD is not bad for a Les Paul case in my opinion. Yeah, those things are pricey, man. I was surprised because everybody talks about the prices of those Epiphone inspired buys. However, I will say this much, that the cost of those Epiphone cases is about 150 euros out in the wild. Was that 130 dollars US? And so, the individual components of those inspired by Gibson's Epiphones, add up. They do add up. And the case is one of the more expensive parts of that. They could say, well, we're not going to put a hard case with this, but they do it. And I do commend them for that because those things are getting pricey. I just had some just in case cases. I have those too. Guitar Trader in New Jersey had some of the first 70s true specs albums. Yeah, we're going to talk about Guitar Trader too one of these days, Mike. Let's talk about these guys. Because quite frankly, more so and and the story with Strings and Things is a little bit more famous, I guess, for lack of a better word, than with the Guitar Trader. But I am familiar with both of those, and we're going to talk about them both eventually. Tonight, let's talk about Strings and Things and their story. Uh, there were a few places that in the 70s, earlier, let's say 73, 74, 75 period, like Strings and Things, and as Mike mentioned here, Guitar Trader, and a few others. Oh God, one of the other ones slips my tongue. Oh, but old man disease. But quite a few guys out there. But this one with these guys had a little bit more cachet to them because they were actually invited to the Kalamazoo factory and they were able to pick out the bits and pieces that they wanted to use. And the bits and pieces that they used were actually leftover bits and pieces from those famous 50s guitars. So, is it a reissue? Is it an original in that case? If they're using, the bits and pieces from a real 58, 59, 60? It's a very interesting question. We're going to explore that tonight. Let's talk about that. So, why is this important? Well, because a lot of things happened with this movement of wanting to get more genuine or more close to the original Les Pauls that they were not producing in the 1970s at the Norland factory, Kalamazoo. And so let's rewind back to the 1970s. If you were a guitar player back then, and some of you watching probably were. I myself, in 1974, 75, when this place was jumping, was 9 years old or so, or 8, 9 years old. So I wasn't exactly in the market for Les Paul yet. But Gibson's was in what we know now as the Norland era, as I said. That meant heavier Les Pauls, pancake bodies, multiple piece tops, volutes, headstock angles that had changed. And this all came about because of cost cutting. And pure and simple, that was the only reason they did that. A lot of people say, oh, well, they were designing guitars like this, prior. Yeah, they were. But they were also, in effect, because they were doing the same thing at Fender. Fender was building a Strat for Jimi Hendrix that was a pancake body, believe it or not. And so, yeah, and that was in, what, 67, 68. So, honestly speaking, even in the early 70s, it was not a new thing. It was a cost-cutting thing, pure and simple. And a lot of players hated it. People were looking at those changes and thinking, man, how do I get something that feels like, the Les Pauls of back in the day? And so, Parker, what are your thoughts on orange wood guitars? I have no thoughts of. I've never actually heard of them. Say hi, Parker. How you doing? Welcome to the chat. Welcome to the live stream. There was a growing nostalgia for the original 58 to 60 Les Paul standards, the so-called burst. But the problem was those originals were already rare. They didn't make a lot of them because they weren't popular when they first came out. I've heard tell that there was maybe only 1,400 total for all those years combined. The so-called burst were expensive back then as well because of guys like Norm. Norm at this age, there was a couple of things going on. You had Norm in Sherman Oaks, starting what we will now call, we'll attribute to Norm. There is a lot of other, there are other characters too, but Norm is the main one. Just like Strings and Things is one of the main ones here. And Norm over in the West Coast was starting the vintage era, the era of vintage guitars, because prior to Norm, they were just secondhand. And on the East Coast, well, at least in the mid states, the mid Atlantic states, there you had, like in Memphis, for example, you had guys like Strings and Things reaching out and wanting to start the reissue era. And not only did you have during the same time period the vintage scene getting set up, the reissue scene getting set up, but you also had, which started my thought on this in the first place, was the modding era. Because the modding era also started during this time too. You have to remember on the East Coast, DiMarzio was doing his thing. And he was exporting his pickups everywhere, to be frank with you. This 77 EG 900B that I have coming has DiMarzio PAFs in it from 1977. So this was an era where the guitar market, as we know it, was in its infancy and was developing. It was really developing. So there's a shop here behind me in Memphis, Tennessee, called Strings and Things. Maybe some of you guys know the name, some of you don't. It was run by two guys, Chris Lavelle and Greg Lawing, and also a guy named Tom Keckler, or TK, doing a lot of the tech work. And these guys were on the front edge of what we now call custom guitar work, refinishing, routing, wiring mods, even swapping pickups, which we're going to come back to in a minute. They had customers asking, can you make my Les Paul feel like a burst? And they thought, why not go to the source? So a lot of guys were bringing in their 70s Les Pauls, and they were asking them to be, again, that's a whole industry now too. There's the, vintage restoration that my old luthier in Singapore actually worked for, where they would take your modern Les Paul and turn it into a vintage Les Paul, in terms of the shape, the top, and curve of the top, and things of that nature. But it all started back here with Strings and Things. So they reached out to Gibson, and to their surprise, Gibson said, yeah, guys, come on over. Patrick says your sound is a little distorted. Probably so. The internet connection tonight is really, really, really bad. It's been bad actually all weekend. So we're gonna get a little bit of. I'm surprised that we haven't got any stalls yet. So yeah, we're gonna have a little bad audio here tonight, guys. My apologies for that ahead of time. Gibson bought them to the Kalamazoo factory. Not just a phone call, not just a catalog, in person to the plant. And they were shown leftover bodies, necks, hardware from the old days. More importantly, they also got the original blueprints for the 1959 Les Paul Standard. So these guys had access to leftover bodies, necks, and hardware, and the blueprints. And I would dare say that this is more than just a reissue, because frankly speaking, these were those burst Les Pauls. They were just assembled later. In this case, almost, over a decade later. And so Strings and Things asked them, can you build us guitars to these specs? The specs being the old, blueprints of the 59. And Gibson agreed to make a small run in batches of 6 over about 4 years. So between 1974 to 1978, Gibson built 24 guitars total for Strings and Things. Not all of them had, by the time they got to the end of the run, they were, making stuff new, but still to those old specs. But certainly, the first four, probably the first eight of that run, were using original burst parts. And to my opinion, and you can go online and take a look at them, there were plenty of examples that you can find pictures of. To my mind, this is more than a reissue. Like I said, this is an original burst. It was just assembled later. And that's what I think makes Strings and Things stand out. Their stories stand out because they had access that a lot of the other people who were trying to do the same thing at the time did not have. You know, these guitars were built closer to 1959 specs than anything Gibson was doing at the time. Narrow headstocks, no volutes, narrow binding in the cutaway, which is really important. Not only that, but the narrow binding in the cutaway is such a small thing. If you haven't seen it, then you wouldn't look for it. But it's one of the things that I look for on Les Paul copies to see if they have that kind of quality. Would they'll have that? Um, yeah, the Japanese ones did. Some of them did. Deep top carve, no weight relief, and one piece mahogany neck. One piece necks. Old school specs. These were the first true reissue Les Pauls, but I would argue that they were more than that. They were more than that. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Now, Gibson only sent the guitars with natural finishes, plain tops. And for them, all the real cosmetic magic happened at Strings and Things. Because remember, they were a repair shop. They were also a spray shop as well. They were a one-stop. They were the equivalent in the 1970s of vintage restoration. You take your guitar there, they route it, spray it, they do everything in order to modify it to make it to your specs, your desires. So again, what is old is new. And our modern guitar market had its genesis during this period. Every aspect of it. Second, the vintage market, the reissue market, and I'm going to touch upon it here in a minute, the modding. The modding started. Because prior to this time, much like me, most guys were like, oh, well, this is the pickups it came with, and there was never a thought of changing the pickups in it. You ask a guy like my uncle Carlton, old school player, from the 50s on, and all of his guitars have the original pickups, and he never crossed his mind. Never crossed his mind. But we'll get on to that in a minute. At Strings and Things, you had Tommy Stinson, Tommy doing the finishing work. Not the Replacements guy, a different Tommy, not Tommy Stinson from the Replacements, but TK, they called him, was doing all the burst work. He did cherry, lemon, and even some unusual colors according to customers' desires. And every single one of those 24 guitars was finished, and final assembly was done at Strings and Things, not Gibson, not Gibson. So when people talk about the first Les Paul reissues, yeah, Gibson made the bones, but the guitars were really built to order, then refined, aged, and customized by a small shop that they knew from experience what the players really wanted. And that made the difference there. These guys right here behind me at Strings, this group of folks here. And that's important because another thing came out of Strings and Things that, quite frankly, I think is significant. I think it's one of the more significant things. Frederick Rogers, better late than never, and I'm so glad that you're here. So glad to see you, Frederick. Good to see you. Let me catch up here in the live stream chat. Mike Watson, every guitar player in the 1970s loved the Super Distortions pickups. Yeah, we're going to talk about that here actually next. Benny Larson, it must have been hard for guys who had already built up some tinnitus hearing about strings and things. Yeah. Mike says 50s gold top burst combos for big bucks for good quality examples. Yeah, a lot of guys were doing conversions at that time as well, and a lot of them were being done in strings and things. Sharon says, hi Sharon, how you doing? Ishmael says, hope you've had a healthy bath movement today. Thank you, Ishmael. I never had anybody outside of my doctor show that kind of compassion and concern, but it's appreciated. A little strange for the subject tonight, but yeah. Now, the pickups. This is where the story with strings and things gets legendary, actually. Some of these guitars came with T-top humbuckers, which were standard Gibson pickups in the 1970s. Everybody says that, the Northern era Les Pauls were shit, yet for some reason T-tops trade at a premium, okay? A lot of big money for T-tops these days. Try to go out there and find a set of T-tops from the 70s and see how much you're going to pay. They were, in their opinion, at that time, voiced to what they thought would be a modern sound. Back in the 70s, players were pulling these T-tops out of, were pulling the old burst buckers out of their, what we now call vintage Les Pauls, and replacing them with the new modern sounding T-tops and DiMarzio Super Distortions and DiMarzio PAFs. So this was a huge revolution, like I said, in the guitar world. Because prior to that, you didn't really touch shit. You didn't think about changing your pickups. But you had this perfect storm. DiMarzio on the East Coast, Norma on the West Coast, and everybody else in between, creating this new market. And this really prime period of 74, 75, 76. I remember the summer of 76. I went to Magic Mountain. They had opened in 76 in outside in Valencia, California. But anyway, I digress. I'm old. And these reissue Les Pauls came in from Gibson that they had ordered, strings and things, with T-tops. And because a lot of their prior customers were saying, get these burst buckers, it's crazy. Out of somebody tried to, I told you my Luther, the same guy who worked for Vintage Restoration, wanted to sell me an authentic PAF from 59 for $2,000. At that time I said no, and I still am glad I said no, because I just don't think I don't care. There's no pickup that's worth it. And by the way, a digression again, because my mind is full of digressions on this subject, unfortunately. One of the reasons I played Star Wars Battlefront, not to think about these things, but there were 4 winding machines at Gibson at that time, which means that you had 4 different tonal varieties that you could get even in those now so-called legendary PAF pickups. So you could get, of those 1,400 bursts, you had 4 flavors of PAF, magic there. And who's to say which one is the good ones, which one? Then the swaps of the magnets, sometimes it's identical 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 5. You guys get what I mean? So much so, these guys in the 70s didn't care. Get these out of here and get me some Super Distortions. And what did Strings and Things did? They took all these PAFs, these burst PAFs from 58, 59, 60, and they put them in a box in the back. And when these reissues that they did came in, they said, "Hey, we got a couple of sets back there of original burst pickups. If we put those in these reissues, then we really got something here." And that's what they did. That's what they did. The rest of the so some got T-tops, and the rest in the shop did indeed get real deal PAFs into them before shipping them on to customers. These were replica pickups. These were genuine 1950s Gibson PAFs pulled from earlier guitars, now installed in what were essentially the first custom order 59 style Les Paul Gibsons made since the 1960s. So if you got one of these original Strange and Things, not only were you getting the parts and the hardware from guitars of that period, but in some cases you actually got the pickups. And again, like I said, where does it cease being a reissue and it's a real deal burst? It's just built later. It's assembled later. So that's why I think the Strings and Things story really stands out. Because, everybody says, well, what's and these guitars sell now for about $12,000 if you can find them. But I believe that there will come a day where these guitars will not be up there, Joe Bonamassa is not going to be knocking down the door for them. However, well, maybe he will when they get to a certain value, but they're going to get up there. They're going to get there for these reasons. For these reasons. Mike says T-tops are primo. Yes, they are. Mike says now real PF is at least 5K. Yeah. Bloody Nine says, what the fuck is this channel? I've been asking myself that for a long time. So if you can give me an answer, let me know. Tommy Max says, loving this story. Welcome, Tommy. Never heard this before. So cool. Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate you saying that. That means a lot to me. Mike says, a pair of Greco Dry Zs are about 2K is set on the market because the Greco, by the way, the Greco Dry Z pickups are what my pickups in my Partscaster Strat are. Those are copies of that. Alnico 3 pickups. Because the Greco Dry Zs are said to be the closest thing to those original burrs. But again, like I said, how many winding machines did they have at Maxon when they were doing those Grecos? You guys got. I mean, it's great to stop and smell the unicorn shit sometimes. But the reality is that you got to look at the reality. And at Maxon, if they had 4 winders at Gibson back in the 50s, at Maxon in the 70s, they had at least 10. So that means that your Greco Dry Z could have been made on any one of those machines and therefore have more winds than the other or less winds. There's too much variation there to really make a big deal out of it, in my opinion. If it was one magical machine that was making all these PAFs back in the day, then I'd say, okay, there's something to it because they were all made on the same machine. They all had the same winds, they all had the same magnets, but they don't. But I throw that out there. A digression, I guess, but a pertinent one. Now, out of those 24 guitars, by the way, the end of the story tonight is a sad one. Because this shop and all these fine people lost their jobs when this shop burnt down. Of those 24, not all of them made it. There was a fire at the original Strings and Things location on Cooper Avenue, pictured here. And they lost several of their reissues. As a matter of fact, it is believed now that of those 24, only 13 that can be documented still exist. That means if you come across the Strings and Things one, whatever price, it's one of 13 that are known documented. That's why I say, somebody asked me what I think the next vintage, big thing is going to be. It's going to be these Strings and Things Les Pauls. Because there's only 13 of them left out there. And that's a story. Well, the other half mysteriously died in a fire. Some old man comes out and I remember that fire. I was there. It was a strange night, a hot night. I was drinking tea on the porch. So it's got a story to it. So these are going to be interesting going forward. There's no special serial number range No factory stamps. The only way to verify one of these is with a sales invoice or a certificate from Strings and Things dated between 1975 and 1978. They're like ghost guitars, legendary among collectors, but very few have ever surfaced, and when one does, it's usually mistaken for a random New Orleans era modded Les Paul, unless you got the paperwork. So that's the other thing. Like I said, documented. When I mean documented, I mean that these 13 guitars, they have their paperwork. They're not going to be rejected because of lack of paperwork, but they have to have the paperwork. So in my opinion, these guitars were the first true Gibson reissues. Even more so, these were the first. These were true P. These were true burst, in my opinion. Even though they were finished and customized in Memphis, the parts, the hardware, and the pickups in some cases were all, from Gibson, from the factory. T-tops aren't bad either. And these predate the custom shop, by the way, by more than a decade. So, and that's why I say this is one of the greatest unsung stories in vintage guitar history, because it sprang out a couple of trends that have lived to today. The custom shop, modding, and the concept of vintage guitars. I don't know if they even knew what Norm was doing over on the West Coast. But at the same time, you had the synergy of DiMarzio, these guys at Strings and Things, and what was happening on the West Coast, creating this market. The more rare, the higher collective value, in my opinion, Mark. That's why, again, Mike, that's why 13 of them, super rare. Some of them are legit burst. Yeah. Yep. So there's that. If everyone crosses your path in a pawn shop, consider yourself to be lucky. Well, will you take $50 for it? Drive a hard bargain. Be that guy. Even if you find one, even try to get an even lower price than the pawn shop's asking for it. Highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. But, dreams do come true. So, something I want to talk about tonight, because I was thinking, I'm about modding. And where does this come from? Even I myself, growing up, in the 80s, modding your guitar chain, swapping your pickups was not something that you really thought about. You didn't do it. And that's across the board. And I was hanging out with professional guitar players by this point, by that decade. And it wasn't until, really, to tell you the truth, the early 2000s that this modding craze really took off. But it had its genesis back in the mid-1970s. Pawn Stars guitar deals, they had a cool Ed Roman custom Flying V that was awesome. Yeah, I saw that one. I saw that episode. Okay. So let us switch subjects here. I'd like to get back to the book that I've been reading you guys. Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. It's related to a music channel because we're talking about the burgeoning LA music scene back in the mid-1960s. So now we're talking about 10 years before Strings and Things. In that 10-year period, that's where, on this side of things, on the music business side of things really started picking up. So let's read a little bit of this. So this is a quote from Mr. Sammy Davis Jr., Mr. Bojangles himself, Mr. Candyman. I'm going to read you this quote, and I want you to think about him being called, Mr. Candyman. And this is a quote from Mr. Candyman. Everyone there had, at one time or another, been into Satanism, or, like myself, had dabbled around the edges of Satanism for sexual kicks. Sammy Davis Jr. Referring, by the way, to the victims at 10,050 Celia Drive, aka the Tate Bianca murders. Sammy Davis Jr. was a Satanist. He was a follower of Anton LaVey. Anton LaVey was the big guy who ran the Church of Satan in Hollywood and other places, but famously known. And Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. Let me tell you how deep of a Satanist he was. You can. This is not. Eddie Murphy out of his own mouth said this. Eddie Murphy said that Sammy Davis came. He was telling the story to Seinfeld, to Jerry Seinfeld. He said, yeah, I knew Sammy Davis. He came to me and said, Satan's a real God, and, you really should come with me and follow Satan. And Eddie Murphy was like, what the, what the hell? For real, guys. I'm not making that up. You can look that one up. That is a fact. But at least in the case of Sammy, he did. But I was like, thinking to myself, for sexual, kicks, Sammy, really, seriously, you had to go to Satanists to get your sexual kicks, I guess they didn't have OnlyFans back then. David Bender, Washington, D.C. Very excited tonight. Let's make America great again. Thank you, Mr. Obama, for your service at the White House. Yeah, David, if you knew how much I detest him, you would see how comical your statement is. Hi, bro, from Jakarta. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Odie. Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger was a director. He was I'm getting this all at the top of, I'm pulling this out of my home file, so excuse me if it's not 100% correct, but it's 99.9%. He was a director. And as a matter of fact, Sympathy for the Devil, the Rolling Stones, by the way, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were good friends of Keith Anger, a director of Satanist films, who was also part of the Church of Satan. So there's a little tie in there. And by the way, Keith and Mick spent a lot of time in Laurel Canyon. A lot of time. Run Riot. Damn, I thought Sammy was cool for breaking the race barrier in the entertainment business. He broke the race barrier in the Satanist groups as well. They're like, well, we need a token black here for these orgies. Let's call him Sammy. He's down. Yeah, you broke the barrier, all right. Oh, God, how about LA condition now? Well, if it was like this back in the 60s, Odie, you could well imagine how it is now. But let us continue on. In the previous discussion, we made a sampling of some of the most successful and influential rock music superstars who ever emerged from Laurel Canyon during its glory days. But these were, alas, more than just musicians and singers and songwriters who had come together in the canyon. No, they were destined to become the spokesmen and de facto leaders of a generation of disaffected youth. The unprecedented mass appeal of new rock and roll gave the singers a voice in public affairs, basically. So we see we talk about celebrities need to shut up now. Basically, this is where it came from, started back here. That, of course, makes it all the more curious that these icons were, to the overwhelming degree, as we've displayed, the sons and daughters of the military intelligence complex and the kinds of families that would have wielded vast wealth and power in the country for a very, very long time. In the case of David Cosby, over 200 years. True blue blood. It could, of course, be argued that there was nothing necessarily nefarious in the fact that so many of these icons of the past generation hail from the military intelligence families that they did. Perhaps it could be suggested that they had embarked on their chosen careers as a form of rebellion against the values of their parents. And that, I suppose, might be true in a couple of cases. But what are we to conclude from the fact that such an astonishing number of these folks, along not just them, but their girlfriends, their wives, their managers, etc., hailed from a similar background? Birds of a feather flock together, in other words. And are we to believe that the only kids from that era who had musical talent were the sons and daughters of Navy admirals, chemical warfare engineers, Army Air Force intelligence officers, etc.? Or were they just the ones who could be signed to lucrative contracts and restlessly promoted by their label in the media because of these contacts? If these artists were rebelling against rather than subtly promoting the values of their parents, then why didn't they ever speak out against the people they were allegedly rebelling against? Why did Jim Morrison never once, never ever denounce or mention his father's name in escalating one of America's bloodiest wars? And why did Frank Zappa never pen a song exploring the horrors of chemical warfare? Interesting enough, he wrote songs about everything else but the subject that he would know a lot about. He did write a song called Ritual Dance of the Child Killer. We'll get into that later, that was more than just an allegorical song. And which Mamas and Papas song had in the lyrics laid waste to the value and actions of John Phillips' parents and in-laws, and in which interview exactly did David Cosby and Stephen Stills disown the family values that they were raised with? They never did. They never did. And the reason that they never did, again, like I said, this was a psyop. This was a setup from the beginning. We can enjoy the music that came out of that period, but realize that the undertone of it was more insidious. It was a way, much like they tried during, I saw in the States from afar, from 30,000 feet, as I like to say, in the States, they tried to use celebrity in order to influence the election. That blew up in their face because we've been getting this since 1965, and quite frankly, we're getting tired of it. It's one of the wolves that you can see coming from a mile away. But back then, it was a new thing. So I throw that out there. Music pop psyop, exactly correct. We'll take a closer look at some of these performers. We're going to look at the counterculture in the 1960s and what exactly gave birth to it. According to virtually all the accounts that I have read, this was essentially a spontaneous, organic response to the war in Southeast Asia and to the prevailing social conditions at the time. Conspiracy theorists, of course, have frequently pointed out that what began as a legitimate movement was at some point co-opted and undermined by intelligence agencies such as Intel-Pro. We've heard about that before. Entire books, for example, have been written, of course, in the past tense, about how these music artists were subjected to this kind of interesting connection with FBI and CIA and military, intelligence. I'm scamming through here, guys, because I want to get to the more juicier bits. What if, in other words, the entire youth cultures of the 1960s was created not as a grassroots challenge to the status quo, but as a cynical exercise in discrediting and marginalizing the budding anti-war movement and creating a fake opposition that could be easily controlled and led astray? And what if the harassment that these musicians supposedly were subjected to was largely a stage-managed psyop designed to give the leaders of the counterculture some of the needed street cred? Or, Stephen, we're going to send a couple of cops to, you raise up your arm and they'll whack you a couple of times, we'll take some pictures, and it'll make you look good with the hippies. What if in reality they were pretty much all playing on the same team? the cops, the musicians, the managers, the music publishing companies that sprang up. I should probably mention here that, contrary to popular opinion, the hippie flower child movement was not synonymous with the anti-war movement. That much I do know. I'm old enough to know that the hippie flower power child that started in Haight-Ashbury, moved to San Francisco, was completely different from the anti-war movement. It was two completely things. You know, one was about tuning out, dropping acid and just saying, I'm out of common, society, normal society. Whereas the other one was violent protests that eventually led to what happened at Berkeley. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Or I'm getting ahead of David, actually. As time passed, there was, to be sure, a fair amount of overlap between these two movements, and the mass media outlets, as is their case even today, they didn't give a crap, so they smeared the two of these movements together. Anyway, in their mind, an unwashed band of drug-fueled longhairs were all the same anyway, whether they were for peace or for war, or anti-peace or anti-war. It didn't matter. The reality, however, is that the anti-war movement was already well underway before the first aspiring hippie arrived in Laurel Canyon. The first Vietnam War teach-in was held at the campus of the University of Michigan in March of 1965. The first organized Walk on Washington, the Walk on Washington, happened just a few weeks later. Needless to say, in both of these cases, the Walk on Washington with Martin Luther King and the discussion at the University of Michigan, in both cases, there were no hippies in attendance at either event. They were all clean-cut, folks. Needless to say, that this problem would soon be rectified, because you can't have no norm. You can't have the normies saying there's something wrong with this, because then all the other normies will say, hey, wait a minute, my neighbors don't like this. But if they're a bunch of dirty, long-haired hippies, then who's going to listen to them? Okay, it was basically what David is saying here. And the anti-war crowd, those who were serious about ending the bloodshed in Vietnam, were sidelined. They were sidelined. So a little setup there tonight. We're going to get in a little deeper, because if you don't know your history, then you are lost. You are lost. You are lost. You really, 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 really should. Come on, does it have to be Obama tonight, guys? I got 14 Obamas tonight. Can I get a Chris Tucker? Can I get a guy from, Terminator 2? Hell, I'll even take Kevin and Peele, or whatever those guys' name is. Give me something here. Give me something here. But in any case, just a thought, guys. Think about it. It's all, we're all thinking about, hindsight is 2020. We're looking at this, in 2025. We have the records. We know what happened. We know that this is really how it went down. But is it any different today? That's the question I want to leave you tonight asking yourself. Is it any different today? Have they taken this same kind of psyop and moved it forward here to where we're experiencing ourselves now with certain things? I want you to be of independent and of serious mind to challenge that question and to come up with an answer. And if you can come up with an answer to that, then you're on the right track. To expanding yourself and to understanding the world as it really is, as opposed to how you want it to be. All right, so that's it, guys. I will say adios and adieu to you. My shipment should come in tomorrow, I'm being told. So that's good. That means that we'll have an unboxing video coming up this week, so you can have that to look forward to. Probably shooting it tomorrow if they come in tomorrow. It's FedEx. They're usually pretty on time with those kind of announcements. So tomorrow we'll be getting that in, and we'll be doing an unboxing of that, and that should be coming out on Tuesday. And then Wednesday we'll be back here for the live stream. So until that, you guys take care. I want to thank every one of you guys for showing up as always. You take care and God bless. Good night, everybody.